What if 2 hours could undo everything? Not 2 hours of courtroom drama, not 2 hours of legal arguments, 2 hours of one man alone in a room, not knowing he had the right to say nothing. He signed it, voluntarily, or so everyone believed. That signature sent him to prison for 20 to 30 years. And then the Supreme Court of the United States stepped in and asked one devastating question. Did he actually know he could say no? His name was Ernesto Miranda. And the legal loophole that freed him and then convicted him again rewrote the rules of law enforcement forever. Ernesto Arturo Miranda was 23 years old. Born in Mesa, Arizona, an 8th grade dropout, a laborer, a man with a record, a petty criminal history that started before he was a teenager. He was not a mastermind. He was not some calculating fugitive. He was a man with a troubled past, and he was about to walk straight into history. Several days earlier, an 18-year-old woman named Lois Ann Jameson had been abducted near a movie theater in Phoenix, driven into the desert, and violated. She described her attacker to police. The description fit Miranda. When police identified a car matching the victim's description near Miranda's home, they brought him in. He came willingly. He sat in a lineup. The victim couldn't positively identify him, but the detectives told Miranda she had. Then they walked him into a room, closed the door, and questioned him for 2 hours. No lawyer, no warning, no explanation of his rights, just 2 officers, 1 suspect, and a very long silence before the confession. Miranda signed a written statement admitting to kidnapping and assault. The form itself noted the confession was made knowingly and voluntarily. Miranda assumed that because he'd been identified, the game was already over. He didn't know he could stay silent. Nobody told him. Here's where the law gets sharp. The Fifth Amendment to the U.S. Constitution says no person shall be compelled in any criminal case to be a witness against himself. That's been on the books since 1791. The Sixth Amendment gives you the right to a lawyer. Also, not news. Also 1791. But here's the thing about rights. They only work if you know you have them. Think of it this way. Imagine you're playing a card game. Your opponent knows all the rules. You don't. You think you have to play every card you're dealt. You lose every hand. But the entire time, you were holding a card that could stop the game completely. You just never knew it existed. That's exactly what happened to Ernesto Miranda. The police didn't lie to him outright. They didn't beat him. They didn't threaten him, at least not in any way that left a mark. But they didn't tell him the rules. And in a small room surrounded by authority, with no legal knowledge and no advocate, the psychological pressure alone was the compulsion. The legal question was precise. Does the Fifth Amendment protection against self-incrimination extend beyond the courtroom into the interrogation room? Nobody had clearly answered that. Not definitively. Not for someone like Miranda. At trial, Miranda's court-appointed attorney, Alvin Moore, objected to the confession being entered into evidence. His argument? It wasn't truly voluntary if Miranda didn't know his rights. The judge overruled him. Miranda was convicted of kidnapping and assault, sentenced to 20 to 30 years. Moore appealed to the Arizona Supreme Court. The court upheld the conviction, pointing out that Miranda had never specifically asked for a lawyer. That's the logic. You didn't ask, so we assumed you didn't need one. But how do you ask for something you don't know exists? Enter the ACLU. They brought in heavyweight attorney John J. Flynn and his partner John P. Frank. They wrote a 2,500-word petition arguing that Miranda's Fifth Amendment rights had been violated, not because of what was done to him, but because of what was never said to him. In November 1965, the Supreme Court agreed to hear the case, bundling it with 3 similar cases to settle the question once and for all. The stakes were enormous. Law enforcement across the country watched with dread. Prosecutors warned that if the court ruled for Miranda, it would handcuff police and put dangerous criminals back on the streets. Justice Byron White, in his dissent, put it bluntly. The ruling would, in some unknown number of cases, return a killer, a rapist, or other criminal to the streets. The country was watching, and the court was divided. On June 13, 1966, the Supreme Court issued its decision. 5-4 in favor of Miranda. Chief Justice Earl Warren wrote the majority opinion. The ruling was unambiguous. Before any custodial interrogation, police must inform a suspect of 4 things. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. You have the right to an attorney. If you cannot afford an attorney, one will be provided for you. The Miranda warning, now recited in every police procedural, every crime drama, every arrest in America. So embedded in culture that most people assume it was always there. It wasn't. Miranda's original conviction was overturned. The state of Arizona retried him. This time, his confession was excluded. But there was a witness, a woman he had been living with at the time of the crime, who testified that he had told her what he'd done. Miranda was convicted again, sentenced to 20 to 30 years. Again. He was paroled in 1972. He returned to his old neighborhood. He made a small living doing something extraordinary, autographing Miranda warning cards for police officers. The man whose name was now on every arrest in America, signing cards to make a few dollars. On January 31st, 1976, Ernesto Miranda was stabbed to death during an argument at a bar in Phoenix. He was 34 years old. The suspect fled to Mexico. He was never found. When they found Miranda's body, he was carrying Miranda cards in his pocket. The irony is almost too much to bear. Here's what the Miranda case actually teaches us. And it has nothing to do with criminals getting off on technicalities. It teaches us that rights without knowledge are not really rights. They're just words on paper. The gap between what the law says and what the person in that room actually understands, that gap is where injustice lives. For 2 hours in 1963, nobody told Ernesto Miranda the rules, and that silence, that institutional, systemic, procedural silence, changed American law forever. This is the pattern. It's not always a comma. It's not always a semicolon. Sometimes it's the absence of a sentence entirely. The thing that was never said. The clause that doesn't exist but should. The fine print isn't always something you sign. Sometimes it's something nobody bothered to read to you. Before you're ever in a room where the stakes are high, whether it's a contract, a negotiation, or a conversation with someone who knows the rules better than you do, know your rights, read the fine print, ask the question, because the clause that changes everything might be the one nobody mentioned. If this case made you think differently about the law, subscribe to Clause and Effect, because we're just getting started.